Good to go.
Yeah, I know that. There we go. All right, good evening. I'd like to call to order the regular meeting for, what date is it? March 6th, 2024 of the Cathedral City Planning Commission. It is 6 p.m. May I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Thompson?
Here.
Commissioner Lee?
Present.
Commissioner Lowe?
Present.
Vice Chair Malakoff?
Here.
Chair Daly?
Present.
Let the record show all commissioners are present.
All right, at this time, I would like to invite everyone on the dais and in the audience to please stand for the flag salute. Thank you. And at this time, may I have a confirmation of the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda.
Thank you kindly. All right, moving on to item 1, approval of the minutes of February 21st, 2024. Do I have a motion to approve said minutes?
So moved.
And a second?
Seconded.
All right, any discussion, any changes? Hearing none. Thank you. We'll vote.
Let the record show a motion was made by Commissioner Lee and seconded by Commissioner Thompson to approve the minutes for February 21st, 2024.
Thank you so much. We're moving on to item 2 of the agenda, the public comments. The public is invited to address the Planning Commission on any matter not on the agenda. If you wish to speak on an agenda item, please wait to be recognized under that item. Except for special circumstances, the Brown Act prohibits the Planning Commission or staff from responding or taking action on any comments made by the public unless it pertains to an item that appears on the agenda. All speakers should give their name and city of residence, and please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. Do we have anyone who would like to address the commission?
I received no speaker slips, but it looks like we have a member of the audience who would like to speak.
Okay.
Please state your name and city of residence.
Good evening. My name is Dorian. I'm from here in Cathedral City. And I just wanted to take the time today to thank the commissioners who voted no on the Food for Less gas station when the community and professionals all came out to speak against it. Thank you very much for siding with us. And I also want to say sorry about the disrespect that has come from the council after that to appeal your decision and allow the gas station to be built anyway. In my opinion, you guys do not deserve that, to just have your decisions appealed like that, as if you're not capable of making good decisions for our city. And they did all of that for just 3 job positions. That's all that gas station will bring, just 3 to 4 new jobs. It's very much not worth it. So I'm sorry that the council has done this, and I hope that we can maybe just ban any new gas stations and maybe drive-thrus too. Californian cities have already started doing this in Napa County and Sonoma County. So anything that you guys can do towards that, that would be appreciated. Also, bird scooters. We are still waiting to be the 3rd city in the valley to have these. And I mean, all we're asking for is to let that company be allowed to operate here in Cathedral City. Please and thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
I see no other speakers.
Okay, seeing none, I will close the public comments portion of the agenda and move on to item 3, commissioners' comments, which is unusual in our chain. Does anybody have any comments tonight? Okay, seeing none. We'll move on to item 4, the city attorney report. I hope so.
Empty agenda if you don't.
I know. They gave me my own agenda.
Yeah.
So thank you for being here and for allowing me to kind of just go over the new, aspects of the law that we have to comply with. A lot of this was provided in the memo in the agenda. So as you could see, there are a lot of bills to go through. So I worked with staff and we kind of just focused it in on a few. It's still pretty lengthy, and I wanted to give enough information to really kind of like dive into the bills, but there are other aspects where I'll just be referring to, there are different requirements or different labor requirements, things that maybe the Planning Commission won't really see, but it'll affect the city in some manner. If there are any questions, feel free to just throw them out. Like with all new legislation, we never really know how it's going to play out. Sometimes it is clear, most of the time it's not. And so if there's anything that I can't answer tonight, I will be just taking that down, and then at a future meeting during the city attorney report, I'll make sure to provide whatever information I can get to, clarify that for the bills. So to start, really, we're just recapping California's legislative season for 2023. So it started on December 5th, 2022, and adjourned in September of 2023. They always go over legislative priorities, and just to give you an idea of what it is, for the Democratic legislative priorities, of course, it's always going to be housing, and that's really going to be the bulk of the presentation that's before you today. But as you can see, there are a little bit, in terms of how many bills were presented, there are other issues in California that were addressed as well. And this was kind of the Republican end of this, cutting government costs, acting on homelessness, hot topics for the cities as well. But we're really going to just focus on the housing and development stuff today. So overall, just to give you an idea of how many bills we have to kind of go through to see what applies to the city, there were 890 signed by the time this was over. So it is massive. And so this is going to be the bulk of the presentation. We're really going to just go over the new restrictions and opportunities for housing and kind of what that looks like for the city. Like I mentioned, I worked with staff just to kind of narrow this down. But if there is another bill in that memo that is of interest to you, please let me know. And then, like I said, I'll provide that at a future meeting, provide that information. So we'll go into, you have heard about this one, but just to reiterate, AB 1033, the separate sale and conveyance of ADUs. So state law has historically allowed local agencies to prohibit the separate sale and conveyance of ADUs from the primary dwelling unit. But the sole exception to that had always been if a nonprofit can sell or convey through an establishment of a tenancy in common. So it was very specific things that you needed to meet in order to convey an ADU separately. Now, AB 1033 is authorizing, but it's not requiring local agencies to adopt local ordinances that allow the separate conveyance. Condo projects approved under the legislation will remain subject to the Subdivision Map Act and then the Common Interest Development Act. But like I said, this is optional for the city at this point. To give you an idea, most cities are kind of, a lot of clients that I work with are just kind of sitting back and wondering what everybody else is going to do. I think it looks a little different for cities that have maybe a little more open space. So if you're looking at maybe residences that have a little more property to them, maybe conveying an ADU that's 3,000 square feet or 2,000 square feet is like conveying a house. So some agencies might consider it, but so far I have not seen any in California adopt this ordinance.
So, if
Yes,
I can...
no, please.
Yeah. Does that mean that we could bring forward an amendment to our ordinance that says that we won't do that? Or is it something that we have to look at on a case-by-case basis?
So I think if we were to pursue an ordinance opting into AB 1033, that would need to be an ordinance, say, electing to allow the condominiums to separately convey. In the absence of doing that, I would say that our code would not permit that.
Okay, right. There was one other mention in there. They talked about including properties that were built or developed by a qualified non-profit corporation. And I'm wondering if are there any like that in Cathedral City?
So I have not checked within the city, but we haven't had any applications for that, right?
We have not.
Thank you.
Okay, so 1033, moving on to the next one. AB 894, shared parking. So I know parking is always an issue, no matter what the development is. We're always concerned with how that's going to look, what traffic is going to be a part of every project. And generally, we've been allowed to just make our own ordinances and have developments comply with whatever we have in our zoning code. But AB 894 now requires us to ministerially approve shared parking agreements to meet parking requirements. But there are certain things that we have to look at. You know, they do have to meet certain parameters. So these are the parameters that we would be forced to approve. So we have to approve a shared parking agreement if the parking agreement uses underutilized parking, which is 20% or more unoccupied for the parking, includes a parking analysis using peer-reviewed methodologies. The bill goes into a little bit of that, but that would be a separate consultant issue. Secures long-term provision of parking or allows for periodic review and approval of the parking. Involves parking located on the same or contiguous parcel and does not require more than 2,000 feet of travel by the shortest walking route, or if more than 2,000 feet, provide shuttles or other accommodations. So the state is really trying to move towards ministerial approval for lots of issues that kind of come before the city, this being one of them. I don't know exactly how this will play out, but I can imagine that some developers are going to look at trying to meet these qualifications if it makes it easier. Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm not sure. Thank you. I seem to recall a couple different cities having similar ordinances before this ever came up. So if a city already has an ordinance for like a daytime, nighttime use that can have shared or overlapping parking, you know, if it already exists, then it would be, it would already exist.
Right.
But then anything that's new would have to do a parking study just to substantiate that a daytime and nighttime use would work?
So it depends if they want it ministerially approved. So this is, you know, some ordinances or some cities might already have some sort of requirement that allows for shared parking agreements in some form like you're describing. And that's completely within the city's ability to do so. This is actually pushing a city's hand on those that don't really want to accept parking agreements under these specific circumstances.
So like if a hotel and another use came to the city and they met those requirements and they had the proper study, then it could be approved by the Development Services Director.
Mm-hmm. Any other?
I'm hesitant to open a can of worms, but
We're going to do it.
we recently had something come before the panel about parking, off-site parking. Would this provision, if this had been in place before, have addressed that type of situation?
I don't think so. Because they still just had a short-term lease for that off-site parking. So I think provision 3 that secures a long-term provision of parking, they still would not have met that test.
Okay. But as far as if they had come forward and said, this is what we got, the city would have had to accept it.
If it met all the
Those
prongs
requirements.
that are on the slide, yes. I could see this in a case where you have, say, an older shopping center that may have a very large parking field, and that shopping center is going through a redevelopment proposal or phase, I could see a developer looking to access some of the parking in that shopping center as shared parking. If these were on separate parcels, but, you know, within 2,000 feet, I could see that being a case where AB 894 really helps a developer say, I don't need to provide parking on my parcel. There is sufficient parking in this old mall, this old shopping center, something along those lines. So I could see it where there's already an asset that they're trying to repurpose or reuse in some manner.
Thank you. Thanks.
And I'm sure that you're going to see a few of these wanting to come through, only just because it also takes away some of the discretionary approval that you guys have in regards to parking if they manage to meet these criteria.
So how, procedurally, how would that work? So let's say somebody comes before us in a year and they want to have the shared parking, then the staff report will basically say that they're short 5 spaces they're going to share with so-and-so. They meet these 5 requirements of AB 894, and it'll be done ministerially after the project approval, after the entitlement has been acted on?
I think that's a mechanic that we're going to have to work out.
Yeah,
You know,
so-
these are all new bills, and it's still very early in terms of how it actually will work. I suspect that this is going to require an amendment to our code because we do have shared parking. It is defined, and you know, this may be a case where we need to include this as an alternative to the language that's in the code.
Very interesting.
A little more about 894. So we could require proof of execution of the agreement as a condition of approval to the project. So there's a little bit, you know, of backbone there. But it does provide additional requirements for new developments that are using state or public funds. So if that ever came before us too, we would have to kind of delve into those additional criteria. But the ones in the prior slide, those were like the main issues that they would have to show. Density bonus. So this one is actually really interesting. AB 1287 amends the law to be even more favorable to developers. So it awards additional concessions and amends the law to conform to recent judicial opinions. And the best way to describe this bill is to just give you an example of how it would work. So I'm not a math person. We're using very easy numbers today. So if a project is a 100-unit project, right? If it allocates 15% of the maximum allowable residential density to very low-income households, the project would be eligible for a 50% increase in density. So this would allow for like a total of 150 units, with 15 units set aside for that very low-income household. But if that same project set aside 15% of those 100 units to very low income households, sorry, not very low, we're gonna do, so very low income and moderate income, so we're using 2 different ones. So we're setting aside 15% for very low and moderate. Now you have a 50% bonus for the very low and a 50% bonus for the moderate income. So as a result, the developer would be able to get a bonus of up to 100% over the maximum allowable density for their project.
Meaning that if under our municipal code, they could have put 100 units in, they now can put 200 units in. Okay.
Yeah. I don't see a lot of density bonus applications. I'm not really sure if we see that too much here.
Not here,
Yes.
but I would say that every residential project that I worked on in San Diego County was a density bonus project. And I think what you're seeing through AB 1287, it's trying to tilt the scale a little bit to make this more lucrative as an option for a prospective developer in areas like the Coachella Valley, where the land economics didn't necessarily support a density bonus project previously. With these additional units and with the waivers and concessions granted under density bonus law, it may. So we may start to see density bonus projects with some of the added density bonuses that we're seeing here.
So
Do you think that that would tie into SB 684, where it requires ministerially approving subdivision maps for 10 or fewer housing units? Would that play into this also?
It's speculation on my part, but I would say probably not. I would say density bonus projects, you're going to see those on larger projects than a 10-unit project. I think the bill you're referring to, we'll get to that one in a moment. That's a very interesting bill. We've done some analysis to see how widespread that could play out. It's not in Cathedral City, but I do think the density bonus law is interesting. The evolution of it is interesting, and while we haven't seen one yet, we are talking about it more at a staff level with prospective applicants, and I would say it's probable that we will see a density bonus application, I'd say, in the next year.
Thank you.
So I have a question. If you had for instance, a specific plan that allowed 1,200 units within a project that was governed by the specific plan, but you built, or you had 100 units like this, you had 15% that were very low income, 15% that were moderate income, would your specific plan then have to allow 1,300 units?
Honestly, we would have to evaluate it once that comes in. You know, the hard part of that in particular is because my mind is jumping to another bill that talks about conflicting aspects of like a zoning code and a general plan. So a lot of what the state has been moving towards is almost just diminishing the value of the zoning code and really leaning towards the general plan. So I'm not really sure how it would play out in that scenario.
Mr. Chair,
we did actually have one last year, but you weren't here then, which was Desert Bloom, which does have a density bonus. And I was wondering if this retroactively applies to them in any way, or if they could come back and ask for a further allocation.
So the bill doesn't talk about any kind of retroactivity. If somebody wanted, they would have to start a whole new application.
Right.
And
Okay.
I don't think that is
I'm
very
sure they don't want to do
lucrative in
Because
there.
that's just a TTM,
Yeah.
Desert Bloom, I think.
The way density bonus law reads, too, going back to the previous question, it is meant to be interpreted liberally in favor of housing production. That language is in density bonus law. So I think, to our legal counsel's point, that the state is really trying to lean more towards the general plan and take away some of that discretion that we have in terms of controlling density or controlling residential growth.
Just
It is meant
for
to
clarification,
improve
the very low income, moderate income levels, how are they set for Riverside, and where would I find them if I want to see that information?
Oh, I would have to
Google
look
it.
that one up. Yeah.
You tried?
I tried, and it came up with all kinds of interesting things, but
No, I can get that information and provide it in another meeting. But just to at least give you an idea of what that income looks like for us, definitely I can provide that.
okay, thanks.
I think this is the one we were talking about, 684, ministerial approval of up to 10-unit housing projects on small sites. So the whole point of this is to encourage smaller developments and home ownership to address missing middle housing. So it's supposed to create a streamlined approval process for qualifying infill projects in urban areas that include 10 or fewer lots and 10 or fewer housing units. So it does require us to do this ministerially, which means it will not come before you, so without discretionary review or hearing. So there are some criteria. The subdivision has to be on land zoned for multifamily residential development, no larger than 5 acres, be substantially surrounded by urban uses, and within an incorporated city or an urbanized area of a county with a population greater than 600,000.
Go ahead.
So that first bullet point is what limits the potential application of SB 684 in Cathedral City. This is specific to multifamily zoned land, so your R2, your R3 zoned properties.
Vice Chair?
So if you did a 10-unit subdivision for 10 single-family homes, and there was a 3-foot dedication, it wouldn't have to go to council for the council to approve the acceptance of the dedication, because only the council can accept land.
We'd have to work through that scenario.
Yeah. Because the idea is that there wouldn't be any discretionary issue to determine, right? The idea behind this, I'm not saying that that's how it plays out, because clearly that's a scenario that could happen, is that this would all just be processed through the director.
And would the director still be able to place the standard conditions that they would on a subdivision, basically on a parcel map, like they normally would, and it'd still be a ministerial action?
It would need to be a ministerial action, so, this is something we'll have to parse through when we get that application.
Like with a lot of laws, it's just one of those like, hey, it sounds really good when we write it, but like the actual practice of it is not so clearly
Well,
defined.
it sounds like if there's a dedication, that there's a conflict with other state law.
Right, right. To provide a little more information, the units do have to be constructed on fee simple lots, be part of a common interest development or housing cooperative, or owned by a community land trust. It cannot exceed, the units can't exceed 1,750 square feet, and they are not required to be affordable. They're not required to pay prevailing wages or meet other construction labor costs. So in addition, if the proposed development is on a site identified in the housing element, it must result in at least as many units as projected for that site. If it's not a part of the housing element, it must result in at least as many units as the underlying maximum allowable residential density. And then we do have 60 days to approve an application, but we cannot impose objective standards that preclude the described density, are below specified floor area ratios, require setbacks between units or side and rear setbacks greater than those imposed in SB 9, and we cannot require enclosed or covered parking.
So if it's a ministerial approval, then of course there wouldn't be a public hearing. So how would any neighboring people know about this development? Would they be served a notice?
The law doesn't require notice.
Okay.
So the only way that we can deny this application is by making a finding that the development would have a specific adverse impact on public health and safety. And of course, case law doesn't exactly determine what that means, and we always have a case-by-case basis of how we can support that. So it is a difficult finding to make, but that would be a finding that the director would have to make in order to deny the application.
May I ask a related question? So if this is going through the process, they have to get water, they have to get sewer, and they have to have streets and so forth. Are those processes the same as they used to be?
Again, this is a dynamic that we'll need to work out when we receive that application. But yes, it needs to have the same utilities, the same requirements that any other subdivision or map would otherwise meet. It can be conditioned, and I did just check the bill. That needs to be assured or guaranteed at the time the building permit is issued.
And then you're going to have all of that within 60 days?
not only do we want to ministerially approve it, I want it done in an unreasonable amount of time. So,
Thank you.
Is it, if the 10, so the 10, can you go back 2 slides? One more? So, how would CEQA fit in if there were either a biological or a cultural impact? Would it then not be ministerial?
no, CEQA doesn't fit into this. If you have these criteria, the assumption is that you are exempt from CEQA.
So if the endangered June beetle is there, you just go forward.
Are we good? Any other questions?
No, please continue.
Okay. Okay, hold on, hang tight for this one. This one's a lot. So SB 423, it's an extension and expansion of streamlined ministerial approval for affordable projects consistent with objective zoning standards of SB 35. So I'm going to walk you through SB 35, and this is going to be a very generalized overview of SB 423 because it is a lot. To give you an example, some of the guidance that has been provided is like broken up to 3 different parts, really outlining the criteria. So this is a very high-level review, but I can provide any kind of further detail at a future meeting too if there is some clarity that needs to be had. So it significantly expands and extends the sunset date of the streamlined ministerial approval law. So it was originally created as SB 35 back in 2017. So let me go over SB 35. So SB 35 was affordable housing, streamlined approval of affordable housing. So SB 35 provides that eligible multifamily housing development projects located in infill sites they're allowed in jurisdictions that have not met their RHNA numbers. So those developments, those housing projects qualify for ministerial approval. So once again, it's something to not come before the commission. It allows the applicants to avoid unnecessary issues with discretionary review and SECRA. So it's the whole idea of ministerial approval is just that we are avoiding CEQA and we're avoiding the hurdles that might be done with conditions of approval or other kind of discretionary processes that come before you. So it does 3 different things. So there are 3 different revisions to SB 35 through SB 423. So it deals with circumstances triggering SB 35 and the criteria eligibility. It does go into labor requirements that are revised as well, and then there are also procedural and technical revisions. These are the circumstances triggering SB 35 for that streamlining criteria. So the first one is it increases affordability requirements. So currently SB 35 applies to jurisdictions that have not issued sufficient building permits to meet their RHNA numbers. This is now expanding it. SB 423 is now expanding the criteria to jurisdictions that lack a compliant housing element. It also extends SB 35 to a broader range of zoning districts. So currently, in order to be eligible for SB 35, a site must either have a general plan or zoning designation that allows residential use or residential mixed-use development, or be zoned office or retail, commercial use, and meet the requirements of the Middle Class Housing Act. Now, the eligibility criteria includes sites within any zone where office, retail, or parking are principally permitted. So this change allows SB 35 into zoning districts, including some that do not permit residential use. And this is ministerially to allow this. It also goes through a lot of detail about the fire hazard severity zones. So SB 35 doesn't apply in sites with very high fire standard severity zones as determined by the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. It doesn't allow it in high or very high fire hazard severity zones as indicated on the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection maps. And it has adopted specific fire hazard mitigation measures. So now this is modified. So it deletes reference to the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, and it replaces it with an exclusion for sites within what they call the state responsibility area. That's going to be the new criteria. And a state responsibility area includes zones mapped as moderate fire safety or fire hazard severity zones, not just those in high and very high zones, resulting in an expansion of the scope of SB 35.
Pardon me. Do you know if within Cathedral City environs we have any areas that are in that?
I'm not aware of any.
So it also expands the application of SB 35 to jurisdictions, sorry, I had mentioned this, lacking the compliant housing elements, but I wanted to give you some numbers. So the Turner Center at UC Berkeley between 2018 and 2021 estimated 150 projects comprising over 18,000 housing units were approved on SB 5 developments. With these revisions, they are estimating that there's an opportunity for contractors to have tens of thousands of additional units under SB 35. So just streamline ministerial going through that process instead. It does have revisions to labor requirements, so it does impose additional labor requirements for developments with 50 or more housing units, and revises skilled and trained workforce requirements, mandating them only for developments over 85 feet, so effectively removing them from many of the residential developments that would probably become just before any city.
What's the relevancy of 85 feet? 85 feet of what?
The height of the building.
Okay.
So single-family units are likely just not to
So it'd be
be.
a 7-story building or higher. We don't have any of those in Cathedral City either.
These are the procedural and technical revisions that I thought were just interesting. There are a lot, so I just limited it to just 2 to reference. So local approval authority, SB 35 currently requires us to determine whether a project is consistent with applicable objective standards. So now SB 423 clarifies that this must be made by a local government's planning director or equivalent position, notwithstanding any local law. So even if for whatever reason that we have housing coming through the Planning Commission, this is what the ministerial approval should look like. And we do have a limit on the required studies that we can ask for. So there's a new prohibition restricting governments from requiring any of the following items prior to approving an SB 35 development. So we can't ask for studies, information, or other materials that do not pertain directly to determining whether the development is consistent with those objective standards. And we can't ask for compliance with any standards necessary to receive a post-entitlement permit. That was the long haul.
So on this one, on 423, did you find any reference to the local government's planning commission conducting design review?
No, I'll have to look
Yeah,
to see how
because
that.
it wasn't in the presentation, and I think it may not be in the law, but it was in the digest for the legislation. So,
We can take a look at that. One of the concerns I have about this and some of the other bills, we don't have objective design standards for residential development, and that puts us in a real challenge when we receive an SB 35 application. We don't have those standards to review it against, and I think that really does limit the scope of our review and our control. So that is an area of omission right now in our code that we do need to address. And I do want to correct my statement. There is a very small area of a very severe fire hazard area in the city of Cathedral City on the south side of Palm Canyon at the western edge of the city. Unfortunately, my map has decided to time out as I'm trying to describe this a little bit more, but it's a very small pocket of hillside area.
but not right here.
But no, it would be like where the Glory to God Ministry is.
I'm almost finished, I swear. So AB 1449, CEQA affordable housing exemptions. It does expire in 2033. It adds a new exemption not only for the entitlement of qualifying affordable housing, but also for the actions leading up to and following project approval. So it includes general plan amendments, rezoning, and then even after the lease and sale of the property or financing decisions. Such projects, they have to be 100% low-income housing, except for any kind of manager units. They have to meet prevailing wage and other labor standards and be located in an infill location and meet other criteria intended to ensure that the site has access to transit and other amenities. The qualifying criteria include a slightly more permissible definition of infill than other statutes. So it's requiring a site to be surrounded by urban uses on 3 sides rather than 75%.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
I guess. I can
No,
see
maybe
how
not.
3 sides might be less than 75%.
75 in some cases. They're just trying to make it easier.
Yes, exactly. I have envisioned a scenario.
And then our last one is general plans and zoning codes. I did mention it previously, AB 821. So under existing law, a city or county zoning ordinance must be consistent with general plans. If a zoning ordinance is amended in a manner that is inconsistent with the general plan, residents and property owners are currently able to bring an action against a local agency to enforce compliance with the law, forcing those two aspects to be consistent with each other, and they can do so within 90 days of the laws becoming inconsistent. So if the local agency amends the general plan in a manner that creates inconsistency, right now, there's no like built-in mechanism. Somebody would have to bring an action to enforce or to force the city to become consistent. The city could have an inconsistent zoning plan and general plan for 2-3 years, and that just wouldn't be an issue as it stands right now. Because we're only required to amend the zoning ordinances within a reasonable time, and that's not defined in state law. So AB 821 provides that if a development application is inconsistent with the general plan, but not the applicable zoning code, the local agency must either make the zoning consistent with the general plan within 180 days of receiving the application, or approve the development application based on the general plan, not the zoning code. And AB 821 also authorizes residents and property owners within the city to bring an action within 90 days for failure to comply with AB 821. So I've touched on kind of a few of them, but I'm available to answer any questions, and if there were any bills in particular that you maybe want a little bit of follow-up on, happy to take that into.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the commissioners?
I do have one question. This actually doesn't have a specific implementation question. This is simply curiosity. In the summary that was provided in the the agenda package, there was one bill that said that funds have to be provided, made available for development. I think it was on page 13. Let me pull that up. The Bill 480, SB 482. This bill explicitly requires Department of Housing and Community Development to offer their capitalized operating reserves to supportive housing units developed under the multifamily housing program. Number one, what does that mean? And number two, do we have any projects that are receiving state funds through something like that?
So I know that that's a state or a state program, so if developers want to apply, that's completely separate from what we would do or what we would review here, but I don't think that we have any applications with state funding. Usually whenever state funding is involved, there's like a whole different set of criteria that we have to make sure that we're meeting to, whether it's some sort of contract that has obligations to it or maybe other statutes that are involved. But I don't know that we have any currently.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I was just curious.
Commissioner Lee?
I have a couple of quick questions, and then all the rest, I think I've got a whole slew of other questions, but they relate to different bills. I'll send them to you, and you can let us know if it's worth commenting back at a future meeting.
Okay.
On ADUs, there is that requirement for pre-approved designs to be available, and I understand that some cities have those out there already.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we had a bit of a discussion about this at a previous meeting. So I'm wondering where we are with that. Is it going to be possible for us to leverage the designs from other cities, or are we going to have to go back to the drawing board and draw them ourselves? And incidentally, since they'll be ministerially approved, do we need to match those designs to each of the building designs by community so that they blend in with the communities they're going into? So how do we deal with that?
So I can give you a partial answer. I don't know how far I can get with this, but we are currently negotiating with an architecture firm to prepare a set of pre-approved ADU designs for the city. This is a firm that has done work here in the Coachella Valley. We were impressed by their work in another city. I thought they did a great job. We're not able to just take the work that they did in the other city and put our stamp on it. It doesn't quite work that way, but we do have funding available. We had some residual grant funding that we were able to apply in this case, and we were able to negotiate with them for the production of these pre-approved designs similar to what they've done in another community. And offhand, I believe that there are 3 different sizes, a 1, 2, 3 bedroom ADU plus the JADU, the conversion of a garage, and those will come with varying design types. That's still a work in progress. We're just negotiating the contract right now, but what you see in other communities is you sort of have a desert design, you have a modern design, you have different design types of those base units. We're looking to do that as well. So I am hopeful, I am optimistic that we'll be able to complete the negotiation of this contract with this design firm, and that in the coming 3 to 4 months that we will be able to produce those pre-approved ADU designs. We do have an expenditure deadline for those grant funds, so we are in somewhat of a rush to get that project done so that we can meet our grant deadlines. But I think this will be a significant advancement, much in the way that Desert Hot Springs and Coachella have done, to provide pre-approved ADU plans to their residents at no cost. The bill that was adopted simply requires us to take a designer's plans, review it, approve it, make it available on the website with their contact information so that a resident could contact that designer and use that plan at a cost to them. So the avenue, the path that we're going down allows us to make those plans available at no charge to a resident. And I think this directly implements the vision or the direction that we got from council to replicate or mirror what Desert Hot Springs and Coachella have done.
But in terms of the approval of the design, you know, if that whole area is Spanish tile or whatever, and they want to go with industrial, ministerially you can't say, well, it's an approved design, so you can't say, no, you can't do that.
Yeah, that's one of the tough parts too. Some other concerns that other directors have had is that the language almost lends itself to allow any architect firm or person, or, you know, to submit plans, and we have to deny based on very specific criteria. So there could, I don't know how we would address at this point those stylistic differences.
But we would have something, you think 3 to 4 months, we're going to have something in place?
Yes, in 3 to 4 months. Because of the compressed time frame, I can't commit at this point that there will be an opportunity for a deliberative process with the Planning Commission. We have talked about including an informational presentation to the ARC to get their feedback on that, but for sure we will keep the Planning Commission informed as we're developing that and rolling it out. It just may not be a deliberative, open, public process due to the time constraints on the grant.
And one very quick question, which is just clarification for me. There's a point in one of the omnibus bills that talks about the 6th revision of the housing element, and I'm not sure what that means.
That's the 6th cycle housing element. That's the housing element that we just adopted and saw certified.
Oh, okay. So we've already done that.
We have,
That's
yes. And let's maintain that certification.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, with that, and thank you so much to the city attorney, we'll move on to the city planner report.
I have nothing else to add tonight.
Nothing else? No? Okay.
We do have a new planner. She's not here tonight for me to introduce her to you, but we'll make sure that she comes to the next meeting. This is Cindy Schultz coming this way from Colorado, Pagosa Springs, Colorado. And we'll be introducing her as the project manager for the zoning code update that we're about to embark on.
That's fantastic. Oh, that's wonderful news. I'm glad to hear that. Okay, well, if that is all, then I will adjourn the meeting at 6:52-ish. Thank you.